Hi guys, within this video we're going to look at some natural forms and some artists with a plan to make a pot inspired by them using clay. So if we first start to think about natural forms and what they are, they're obviously created in nature, things like seed pods, shells, fir cones and so on. I've got some I've just found in my garden here that I've collected over the years. A very tatty looking fir cone and a small plant, a little succulent with sort of a very regular pattern to it. And I've decided to have a good look at those because they might inspire my work, but I'm also going to show you the work of Karl Blossfeldt. So he photographed seed pods and plant forms against fairly neutral backgrounds, often black and white, and they're rather beautiful in their isolation. They look quite sculptural, and by that I think they look three-dimensional, almost abstract. So without any leaves and the rest of the foliage, they look particularly sculptural in their form, and you start to think about their three-dimensional shape around them. We're also going to consider the work of Randall-Page. Now in both cases there's a little bit of information about the artist, but you can always go on and do a little bit of your own research. And Randall-Page was inspired by nature as well. He creates these very large sculptural forms. These are carved in stone and they are very, very big, several meters tall, this one. And these are some of his drawings. And if we look at these things, you might think that looks a bit like a peach or a quince, and these things look like something a bit like an intestine or a sausage or the pattern on a brain maybe. So we want you to think beyond the object. At the bottom, there are some drawings Miss Taylor's done for a slightly different project, looking at a slightly different artist, but very similar to what we're doing. So I've included these. Look at this, she's drawn similar shapes to the things we've seen and we're looking at in our research. And she's made a few notes onto them. And she started to draw ideas for a design. Now this one looks like a kind of splash almost with these pieces coming out the top. This one looks like a kind of seed pod with a flower form at the top. Again, this looks like one of these Blossfeldt type pieces. So what we're going to ask you to do is to start drawing and doodling design ideas based on your observations of these artifacts and natural forms. In lower school art, obviously our projects are all contained to teach you skills, but ultimately we want you to be original. So what we're asking you to do is to also think beyond the starting point. Now on this sheet I've collected a few things together that I think in some way relate visually to the work I've looked at and the artist I've looked at previously. Now you'll probably look at many more things than the ones in the video and on the worksheet. We're all very familiar with the COVID virus structure. We've seen it on the news and we've seen it on the internet when we've been hearing all about COVID in the last couple of years. And this very regular structure could be something that might inspire my design. The shape of some of the things I've looked at and the artist made me think about natural forms that I've seen at Manchester Museum, like these beautiful sea urchins and fossils. Also thinking about these round forms, these pods, I started to think about the shape of planets and the surfaces on the planets, which may be a little more irregular than some of the things we see elsewhere. So what we're going to do is ask you to do some research and some drawings. You might be sticking some research down, you might be doing some doodling to explore your ideas. So I've come back to you after I've done a little bit of drawing, and I've been looking initially quite seriously at some of the natural forms and thinking about structures that are quite similar. I then started thinking they look quite complicated to make, so I started thinking more of a sphere that I thought would maybe be an easier structure for me to make in my first clay piece. And I started to look at these pieces around the proteins around the outside of the COVID virus. So I've drawn some elements onto there. I then thought again, because I've looked back to my fir cone and the succulent that I've got on my desk, about these additional pieces that I could add on. Now, when I'm drawing these little drawings, this is the thing that's going to make a massive difference. If you remember, you start off with a circular form, a spherical form is the easiest one to begin with. If we want to make something look rounded, we don't want to draw flat lines on it. We want to draw rounded lines. If you think again about the Earth and the globe in effect, and lines of longitude and latitude. So if you think about these lines wrapping around the form, you can also think about the lines of longitude coming down and round from one pole to the other. And obviously you can combine these two, like a chocolate orange meets a globe, to create something that gives a lot of volume. Now that kind of structure is quite useful if you want to add on little features like these pieces, because you can space them into or use the structure of the drawing to help you position them in a more regular way. So give it a go and see what happens. They're doodle drawings, they are not a committed design. We're working out ideas, not making a commitment at this stage. One thing you might be doing while you're doing this research is obviously looking at the natural forms. You might also be looking back to the artist. If you look at this Randall-Page, you can see this structure I'm talking about in here, and this regular structure on there might help you with the drawing. But don't worry too much about the drawing, just go for it. Now at home over the summer, I have not had clay, but I do have magic clay. It's an air drying clay and it comes in some bright colours, which is quite cool. So if you look at this, it's a bit like a teardrop shape. And I've pressed into the sides of it. I've imprinted some dots and I've added the purple features that stick out of it, a little bit like the proteins. I've made a different design by creating a similar shape with a flatter base. Again, I've imprinted dots and I've created these wiggly lines. They're less regular than the previous design. This one is a similar shape again, but slightly more squat, a bit more pumpkin-y or gourd shape. And it's got these like monster spikes coming out of it and dots and lines. So it's got lots of different features built on. You can see them in the different colours. They stand out quite clearly. When we're working in clay, the clay is a single colour. But don't worry about that because we can decorate it and add colour later. This one is just a simple ball, a sphere, with dots pressed in and then additional dots in red added onto the surface. Again, another sphere with lines pressed in and tentacles coming out the top. It looks very much like a sea urchin or something you might find under the sea. And this one looks a bit more like a flower. It started off with a sphere in this yellow. I've then built out these petals that are coming off it. I've added these pink prong-like features and then added these small little bits and pressed in again. So these small sculptures are only here to inspire you to come up with some interesting and original designs of your own. And in the final stage of this worksheet, what we've asked you to do is to start with a simple form like a sphere, or it could be an oval. So it'll be some kind of rounded form, rather than anything more complicated at this stage. It doesn't matter if it's kind of pointy on top, like the teardrop shapes. They're still fairly rounded and quite easy to construct. The thing we're going to make is a pinch pot, which is going to form the base, and I'll show you how to do that in another video. So once you've done your little shape designs, what we'd then like you to do is work on some of the pattern. These drawings over here are to help you do some working out, and these are maybe more resolved design ideas. You're not committed to these even at this stage, but hopefully you're building from your earlier work into something you're feeling quite happy with. You will make modifications when you come to the actual clay build, because you'll be learning about the materials and you'll find that some things aren't maybe possible and other things you've quite enjoyed doing and you want to build them into it. You might want to consider things like symmetry. If you look at this one, it hasn't necessarily got symmetry in the top section, but they are placed with some sort of order. This one, they're more irregular, these patterns, but there are 3 of them and they take up about 1/3 of the surface area. So I have thought about some mathematical elements to it when I've been building and developing the physical work. Are the elements you're going to add the same scale? So on here, all the elements are about the same scale, and so on and here. In this one, the purple spikes are bigger than the yellow dots. So obviously there is some change of scale going on. And will the density and distribution of all the elements be even? Everything on here is fairly even. The gaps between the dots are fairly similar. In this case, if you look down from above, you can see that I've got these points on very regular axis. So it is fairly even and ordered. So in my drawing, when I'm coming up with these ideas, I might try and base these pieces with some form of order. Now again, your drawings will take some time to develop, and they're worth working out. So you're trying to communicate your idea to your teacher, not necessarily do the most resolved drawing of the thing you're going to ultimately make. Good luck. And remember, in the final stages, you can do several designs. They can build upon each other, or they might be quite different. You can write notes around your drawings and explain things or add thoughts or reference material. Good luck.